Welcome to Big Hearted Indy, where we empower men in Indianapolis to forge deep connections and impactful lives through authentic friendships and service. Join us as we explore personal growth, community leadership, and the transformative power of living out our faith in action. The podcast is produced by Citizen 7, and it is hosted by Greg Enas, Don Palmer, and I am Chris Spangle. And we are so excited today to get to talk to Dave Neff and Chris Huxhold. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's have Greg introduce who we're talking to and why.
Thanks, Chris. It is a real delight for Don and I to have two more boilers here. I'm sitting in the presence of boiler heaven right here on the couch, so you'll get to hear a little bit about that. But I will never forget when Dave Neff and I were chatting. He said, "You got to meet this guy named Chris Huxhold." And I'll never forget that because we met at Hubbard and Craven's there at 49th and Penn. And that has kicked off what I know to be a lifelong friendship. Mm-hmm. And so it's a joy for me to be able to talk with this beautiful ecosystem that God has built of friendship, committed to each other, committed to Him, and committed to our city together. So that's why we wanted these young men, almost 40 and 40 years old.
Oh, 40.
40. Oh, that's right. We just had a birthday party. That's right. 2 weeks here, along with two old guys, Don and I. And I'll turn it over to Don to sort of take it from there as both a boiler and a dear friend of these guys as well.
Well, I guess a first question might be how the first of you two connected, and what has made your friendship so enduring, with demanding careers?
Well, I would say first time we ever connected was way back in the day, soccer. We weren't on the same team, but when you start kind of playing in that indie soccer ecosystem, you start to get to know folks, and I remember seeing Dave's name everywhere, like as we grew up.
And, this was high school?
Well, no, this was after high school.
Oh, after high school,
young.
okay.
We met young. You were Dynamo. I ended up being Carmel.
That's right.
Yep. And we reconnected. I guess it was probably Matt Wagner's daughter's first birthday.
Yeah.
Yep. And then some small group.
Yeah, we were, I feel like my recollection is 10, 11 years ago when I started to do edge mentoring full-time after Salesforce. Chris got involved in an early edge group that I was forming. Mike Mumau was the mentor, and just saw Mike a couple weeks ago at Chris's 40th, and remember hearing about Chris being a part of Mike's group. Didn't really know Chris well, and I think around that time, we met through Soma, the church plant at that time that we were both a part of, and so probably the seeds of it for me beyond sort of the soccer days probably goes back about a decade now, and I feel like in the last 5 years or so, it's gotten much deeper through our sons are in the same third grade class at the Oaks Academy. We go to different churches now, but Chris is just somebody that, we're different, and I learn a lot from our differences in terms of his strengths and maybe areas where I'm not as strong. And just somebody that I can send pictures of my 4 crazy kids, and he'll always engage with it and think it's awesome, whereas a lot of dudes don't do that. So, Chris has been a huge blessing in not just my life, but I know my wife, Joelle, and our 4 kids would say that as well. How long have you two known each other?
Again, my recollection goes back a decade or so. I think we probably played in some CCA soccer leagues, prior to that. Yeah. We're the same age, and he went to North Central, I went to Heritage Christian. So had some mutual friends going back to that era, but we didn't hang out in high school or anything like that. And so
maybe Chris, Dave said you're different. I've always said Dave is a little different.
Yeah.
In a good way. But how would you describe those differences, and maybe what are your complementary strengths?
I would start with the complementary strengths. I think what I admire a lot about Dave, and I think what I admire is also what I strive for. But I see just a very committed husband and father and friend, and I think we just both care deeply about our city and the betterment of
of our city, care deeply about our relationships, our friendships, care deeply about being great dads. And not to say like, oh, I'm a great dad, but I mean, you can see those that are very intentional in how they're fathers. Dave's just a very intentional guy. I could just give you an example. Tradition I started with my son. Every few years, we do like a father-son trip, and that was inspired by Dave. There's lots of examples like that, but Dave's a super intentional guy. And so I think we share that thread, like just aspire to be intentional about being intentional, if you will. And differences, I think I've always thought of myself as a really solid number two. I can see somebody's vision and help activate it. Dave is a visionary, can see how to connect stories to amplify impact. So I think I don't have that gifting, but I love that about him. I think an easy way to label it would be a connector, but I think that's a lazy label because I think it's exponentiating relationships and connection for impact.
Dave?
Yeah, thank you. Chris is somebody that I think Enneagram numbers I know can get overplayed, but I think they're helpful tools. I also don't like how they might box people in at times, but I'm a 3, he's a 4, and so if you know anything about the Enneagram, that'll tell you a little bit. But Chris is somebody that I think he's in the best way possible, very, very in touch with his emotions, and I think I grew up in a great household, but we didn't really talk about emotions a lot, right? So it's been a journey for me as an adult to kind of lean into that through the help of my wife and others. And Chris is somebody that I think does a great way of putting words to feelings, and is very, very perceptive and can kind of pinpoint things that oftentimes are very affirming, that I'm like, wow, like he just kind of hit the nail on the head of like how I'm feeling about a situation that maybe I hadn't verbalized or that he'd been observing. And I think that's just a really awesome God-given gift that not a lot of guys especially always have. And so, I learn from him in that way. And, I also just, he showed me the ropes with the boilers, Don, when I got this job a little over a year ago. He's a card-carrying Boilermaker Alliance member, which, was really meaningful. Obviously, he went to Purdue, but, he has all the history on the Boilermakers, which it's been great for us to have that as just another thing to bond over in our friendship, over the last 14, 15 months. But yeah, I think his just unique ability to sort of emotionally in tune things that are happening in his life, my life, our family's lives, and put words to that is a real gift and something I'm always learning from around him.
Thank you.
You mentioned Dave's a connector of sorts, but you didn't really want to use that word. Dave educated me to what he is. He has formed a network, not a network.
Yeah.
And I like to explore.
I've never self-proclaimed the network. Other people say that, just to be clear. It sounds a little egotistical.
That fits you to a T, and I'd just like to explore a little bit more out of your friendship, because when I see different people around you guys, there's animation, there's fun, there's everything that we want Citizen 7 to be even. You guys activate through that. What's going on? How does that happen? I mean, how do you two guys form 1 + 1 = 20?
Energy is contagious, I believe. And it's fun because Hux has got a great giggle. So I love to I don't know if I'm actually that funny, but he makes me feel like I can be pretty funny. And so, when you get that going, when we see you at Illinois Street Food Emporium, it's just like, yeah, it's just energy is sort of a multiplier. And I think it's easy once you get into the midlife stage of lots of responsibility and work and family and all that, to sort of what you guys are so great at, Don and Greg, is just having fun. I mean, any Citizen 7 podcast or event, you have bigger purpose and vision about bringing guys together, but you're also like, we want guys to have fun. And I think that's something that once you get north of 35 with 3 or 4 kids, men's friendships, not always intentionally, just default mode, go away. And so, Chris is somebody that Hux, as I like to call him, is somebody that
it's easy to have fun with. It's easy to joke about, just little things in life, like conversations. We love doing Greg Enas impersonations. Just Greg, as Chris says, leaks joy, and it's a really. Yeah, we just try to find joy in the mundane, because there's enough sort of things that try to tear you down. So
that's beautiful. Thanks, Hux.
Maybe
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I thought to follow up on that might be for each of you to share maybe a happy memory about your friendship. Think about it and think, oh, now this was a happy memory.
I would love to share this. It's recent. There's a lot of little moments, but part of my story, part of my trial, and that I think was ultimately like a big multiplier, big exponentiating event in my faith journey was, I was married for 5 years, went through a divorce, and related to that, there's so much joy in how God has moved in that, but there's like sneaky moments of lament, like no matter how much you heal through certain things. There's moments like a 40th birthday,
right,
where, as I approach that, all the wives of really close friends are like, multiple requests, like write a letter, affirming, how you feel about, this person, what they've meant in your life, which was such a gift to do that. And I remember I had that moment, and I was like, man, I kind of am anticipating how this birthday is going to go. It's just going to kind of be another event that, as a product of the fact that I am, I'm still like walking that singleness, and I'm totally secure in that. But it doesn't mean that moments like that don't sting a little bit. Right. And so I was kind of anticipating the sting. And this was my birthday. My actual birthday is January 6th, and so, I went through it, and I was like, okay, I was like, man, I was with my family, I was with my son. I was super grateful, and I didn't think anything else was coming. And a group of friends, spearheaded by Dave and others. I still don't know fully. I credit all of them for planning it, but I know Dave had a huge part in it. And I was told that several times. But I walked in on the Friday after my birthday to a room filled with 30 to 40 of the men who have shaped me, and there were, just the gift of their presence was so much. But he had leveraged that Boilermaker Alliance, some of those contacts, and had some of my, some Purdue heroes send me messages. There was heartfelt letters from so many men that I respect and love and cherish, and just there's the intention, right? Just the nuances of like just spending that time was such a gift, but just a thoughtful guy. And I told him one of our good friends came up to me like, man, like if this was me, like I'd feel a little indebted. I'm like, big time, man. Like I don't know how to adequately express my gratitude for how I felt and how that. I told him I was like, it opened an area of my heart that I think had been like reflexively shut for a bit. And I just felt so seen by so many people, and that's just the product of like Dave and so many others' intention. So that's a memory I won't forget.
Super special.
Yeah. No, that was a ton of fun, and it's definitely a small group of us that came together to plan that surprise 40th for Hux, and it says a lot that virtually everyone that we invited said yes. It was like a no-brainer. They've got busy lives, and put it on the calendar, and it was just speaks to the love that was in the room for him that night. And it was fraternity brothers from Purdue and his dad and friends from Indy, friends from church, just different pockets from work. So that was a ton of fun. I think for me, there's things like hanging out at the Rivy in the summer with our boys. Probably a more recent one that's not the 40th would be being in Phoenix back in April for the Final Four. It was cool. We've got a fun picture of us when Purdue made it to the Final Four, and just the joy of Saturday night, but just being there after they won their semifinal game. That was a special memory.
Yeah.
So Dave, where in your background did you develop this? First, your name comes up all the time, that
that Neff work, as Greg called it, but also that intentionality, that thoughtfulness for this party. And was it your parents? Was it an experience of your childhood, teenage years? Where'd that come from?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I have like a silver bullet answer other than there's probably a few things that have shaped it. We've talked about this man in the past, but a guy that I think lived with great intention that I was exposed to early in my career is Jim Morris. And Jim modeled it for a lot of people. And he unfortunately left us, last July. Rest in peace. But, just an incredibly intentional man in every way. And I was fortunate to get exposure to him my first 4 years of my career when I was working at the Pacers, and he was there as well. I also think, I think my family of origin, like growing up in a, I wouldn't say either my parents are particularly like that way, but they obviously shaped and molded me. And growing through some hard stuff when I was younger, I got diagnosed with a chronic disease at the age of 15, Crohn's disease, that some people know about. So I've lived with that for 25 years. And I think when you deal with hard stuff as a young person, because I know some parents that their kids have been diagnosed with like Crohn's that are 7, 8 years old, even younger than I was. And I try to encourage them to say, I know it's disorienting right now as you're trying to figure out the right medicine and all that, but like, trust me that this will make your son or daughter more resilient in the long term. Because I think it gives you a level of empathy that I learned at a young age never to take my health for granted. And part of that was like, asking God to heal me of my Crohn's, because I didn't want to, I waste my life after having some really difficult years with that in the early years. And it's still something I have to manage and navigate around. But I really take pride in seeing people. And I know it's kind of a cliche, but like, man, like it's so easy to just like sleepwalk through life and kind of do the cliche stuff. And like, I'm not perfect at it. There's sometimes I'm in a hurry, the barista, whoever, I'm not looking to engage in a conversation, but really trying to see people uniquely and get a sense for who they are, what they're going through, and just find that piece of common ground. And so I think it's just living a life of intentionality, and we all can do it. It's within our power. You don't need an advanced degree to do that, but it goes a long way when you try to live that way each day.
All right, we've got a question from Mike Evans, who said he was going to co-interview through the Zoom chat.
He's going to grill these guys.
He's going to grill them. So you can join us every fourth Monday of the month, live at noon. Sign up for the email newsletter at citizen7indy.com, and you can find out when we go live. So you can ask a question live as well, or catch up a week later once we air this on YouTube and audio. But Mike asks, kudos on building an enduring friendship at such a young age that already spans over a decade. With young kids, high impact, high velocity jobs, and faith committed lives, how do you prioritize time to invest in your friendship?
I think I come back to this theme of intentionality. You can't create more time. I'm working through this with my 9-year-old right now. We're gifted. Even in that, like nothing is assured, right? And I think everything for me flows under the umbrella of a sincere faith and an intention to walk with Jesus. That has to be the forefront of everything. I think, how you're spending your time. If you're spending time in ways that aren't fruitful as he would maybe lead you, you're going to feel a conviction. And I think I'm not perfect at it, but I think it's faith, it's family, and it's friendships. And I can feel it when I'm not around friendships and spending time with friends like Dave. And, but it all has to fall underneath those priorities. And so I think it's just, if I'm not being intentional about it and I kind of autopilot it, I think I just will feel it. I'll feel that I'm out of whack. I'll feel that, I'm not going in as intentionally as I'd like to be with Hudson. I'm not going in as intentionally with this relationship, or somebody reached out and, like Dave said, sleepwalking. I'll feel it if I'm sleepwalking. And that's the beauty of that walk with Christ, is it's never perfect, but it is always he's a redeemer and restorer of anything, like any situation, any circumstance. If you get out of whack, he's gonna correct you, in loving, gentle ways. And so, I would say it just comes down to prioritization and everything falling underneath that. That true north.
Dave, or another thing?
Yeah, I only thing I would add is, Don, I think you and Steve talked about this on your podcast with 50 years of friendship, but just consistency. There's not always, like, our friendship is not deep convos every week necessarily, but we drip on each other with a funny text message here and there about kid stuff, boiler stuff, whatever it may be. And I think those little seeds, while they may seem kind of mundane and throwaway, like that's sort of the substrate, I feel like, of our friendship. And then we're fortunate that most Fridays we get to see each other. We both kind of have a standing tradition of taking our kids, even if it's 10 minutes, to Illinois Street Food Emporium before school on Fridays, and then we drive down to the Oaks and we talk in the hallway for 10 minutes before morning lauds at the Oaks. And so, like, I have some rhythms, thankfully, that overlay with Hux, where we're chatting about things that are going on that week, right? This past weekend, my wife was out of town with our daughter, and so took my boys up to his house and just had pizza and hung out for a few hours, which was fun. But that doesn't happen very often, right? Given the season of life that we're in right now, especially with me having 4 kids.
Mm-hmm. So it might be helpful. I'm not saying Dave's a household name, but he kind of is. Chris, maybe you could tell us just a little about, who you are, where you were raised,
Sure.
Maybe a couple high points or low points, career-wise, et cetera.
Born and raised in Indy, North Central high school grad, Hail our Panthers. Then headed up the road to Purdue and graduated there in 2008. Came back, started my career, and have not left and do not intend to leave. I started in public accounting, made my way through to some different SaaS companies, leading finance for them, and am really, really just excited and ecstatic about where I'm at now at Elevate Ventures with Toof Day, Matt Tyner, and just as a little bit of information about what Elevate is, the easiest way to describe it: venture capital organization. Our biggest limited partner is the state of Indiana. A lot of exciting things happening there, but I lead finance for them. So go to Traders Point Midtown. My son Hudson goes to the Oaks Academy, like Dave has mentioned. Family's all here. I have a younger sister, and her family lives up in West Clay with us. So, and my son Hudson's 9.
You're my favorite CFO of the year. Always, Hux is just nailing it. Piggybacking a little bit on your story, and then what do you lament in our city around intentionality and friendship, and what's your dream? You guys are bringing men across races, across age. I see it happen, but why do you do that in our town, and what's your dream for Indianapolis in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That's a good question around what's my lament. I don't know if I've thought about that, but I think I can confidently say that, my efforts and my energy to connect or convene, whatever you want to call it, is first and foremost animated by my faith, right? And I think there's people at times that might question, is this about a personal gain or personal agenda? And I've just learned to kind of block that out, because you have to know me, and I'm not perfect, right? But you have to know my heart and my intention around why I spend so much time. I forgot, quite frankly, that I connected you and Hux, right? That's just kind of how I roll. And it's easy. I know, Don's a connector as well. You could go to a dark place where you're like, man, I put those people in touch. Now they're doing business together, and I never saw any financial gain. And I really try not to allow myself to go there, because I think, when we're thinking about the kingdom, God's kingdom, and just life in general, when you are doing good things like that and putting people together, it always comes back around to you. We've talked about this before. It may not be that day or that week or that year. It may not be monetary. It may be an opportunity, to be a part of this board or this new career opportunity or what have you. But I just, in terms of lament, I think one thing that we've talked about is I notice a lot of my peers in the city that are maybe doing well professionally and have a family, but they're not really thinking a lot about how they create more shareholder value for the city. It's more about boosting their lifestyle. It's about the 4 vacations a year, 3 weeks in the summer here. Again, all good things. You only have a narrow window with your kids. I understand that. I'm obviously living through that right now, but I think maybe it was the people I was exposed to earlier in my career of like, Indy was a very different place 50 years ago, and there's no guarantee that it just continues without people from our generation sacrificing some time to be on a school board or to be engaged. We all have different capacity, different throughput. Not saying you got to be on 3, but just start with 1. And I think and this is outside your day job or your church, right, or your family, but like it's going to take all of us and men and women in our sort of demographic to really get engaged, because I think there's a ton of opportunity and potential in Indy, but if you're just on the sidelines solving for lifestyle, there's no guarantee it continues. And so I lament might be a strong word, but I do observe that there's some peers that are like, I'm just focused on my career. I don't need to bother with that community. I got my friends. I'm good. And I'd love to. And Hux and I have had these conversations just recently. He was talking about maybe he'd have some interest and capacity to find a new board. And so just trying to talk through that together about what might make sense given his skill set and his talents and his interests. So
it's really beautiful. Yeah. Anything to add before Don?
Yeah, I would add, if I think of, I like that question, like what's my biggest lament? I think it surrounds, I feel like the Lord gave me a heart for the marginalized. I've been able to serve within an organization called Brookside Community Development Corporation. Huge part of my faith journey as well. And when you see a lot of the statistics around recidivism, and for those who don't know, Brookside serves 3 main ministries: reentry, so individuals reentering society from incarceration; play, for kids that are in rougher areas or where maybe crime is higher, just giving them a safe place to just be, and just be a kid, not worry about some of the stressors that they face. And then the last bucket is housing, so just providing accessibility to sustainable housing. I know there's a lot of ministries around our city like that, and there's huge needs within them, and so I think it's like wanting just visibility to those types of issues, and I think so that's a pretty big broad bucket there, but there's a lot of folks that need help in our backyard, and I say the next one is just connectivity of men. Dave talked about it, like, I'm an Enneagram 4, so I like to say my feelings have feelings. And sometimes it's lots of managed, but I do think it is a God-given gift that over time, like, it was very abnormal, but I've leaned into it, and I just I know that it's from the Lord. And I think, especially with COVID, I think it amplified the problem that, when you check in with somebody, how are things? Good. The first thing we go to is work. It's easy to talk about. Well, how is your heart? Like, how's your walk with the Lord? Like, what is the vice you're struggling with right now? What idols do you have? And so how can we create spaces for men and prioritize spaces for men to be vulnerable with each other, come together? And there's things that I have a heart for and a passion for around that.
I've got a question from the gallery here on Zoom from Mr. Doug Enas, Greg's son. He asks, what's your go-to question for new friend at the coffee shop? It's a good icebreaker or two.
Tell me your story. I mean, that's like the go-to for me. And, depending on who it is sitting across the table, and how well you know them and all that. I just think people generally enjoy sharing their story, right? And tells you a lot about a person if you've asked that question 10,000 times. I don't know if I have. Maybe I'm getting close. But, you start to pick up on some patterns and trends of just people's families of origin. And, not everyone's super vulnerable when you ask that. They might just give you the professional sort of highlights. But for me, it's take as much time as you need. If sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 45, So but that's a great way to kind of break the ice. Like, what's your story? Tell me your story.
That's good.
was going to have the same answer. I like to ask open-ended questions. I don't like giving multiple choice questions or leading anyone into an answer. I think especially just meeting them for the first time. I tell my son a lot, like everybody's got a story. And I think there's a lot of societal pressure to only tell the highlights. Like, and I'll be really open and vulnerable about my, what society would say maybe are lowlights, but those have been the biggest assets to me as a person. And how do you create that vulnerability for people just to authentically tell you who they are and what they've been through?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Great question. Don?
Dave, you, in your bio, describe yourself as a change agent. And so I'm curious as to how do you stay open to change, and how do you also maintain a sense of kind of staying within the lines in order to not be too change-oriented?
Yeah. I think, why I maybe characterize as that, is that from LinkedIn or something? I think.
Neffwork.com.
Yeah.
You're
on Neffwork.com.
Yeah, I think I've swam in different lanes throughout my career, from the Pacers, where I started, to Exact Target, Salesforce, so software, to really essentially co-founding a nonprofit called Edge Mentoring with a mentor, to professional services, consulting, marketing, advertising agency with Prolific and JDA Worldwide. Now back into sports, albeit in college athletics, NIL, something that didn't exist 15 years ago. And so through all that, I've had to adapt and in some ways reinvent myself, which maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. Some people like to stick with one thing and just do that, and maybe that's smarter. I'm probably... I have unique skills, but I'm probably a bit of a generalist in the sense that all those experiences, I think, have given me some range. And part of it is, I think, back to the change agent, you have to be willing to be bold, which doesn't necessarily mean bull in a china shop. There's that, which some people might view as a positive. That's not how I like to brand myself. But you do have to be willing to make decisions. You can't be afraid of your shadow in terms of making a decision. And so being bold, using good judgment, having a bias toward action, bringing energy to everything you do, events, interactions with people. You're constantly, I remember this at Edge, I was constantly winning people over to Edge, whether it was a prospective mentor or a corporate partner or donor. And I'm kind of having to do that now with NIL, because not everyone likes NIL. And they know it's necessary and this and that, but you got to kind of demystify it, educate people. And so that's a challenge, a good challenge that I enjoy for the most part. And so, I think it's just this willingness to be a little bold, to not be afraid of making a decision. You might make some bad decisions and you might only have 60, 70% of the information before you make a decision. But, and then most importantly is being a doer, having a bias toward action. I think that is, that's what drives change.
So that's how we first met. Edge Mentoring. Robert Vane interviewed you for his podcast. And I went to the event, met Bob Goff. It was thousands of people at this event. I didn't really know much about Edge Mentoring, but can you talk about the importance of mentoring? How did that get started? What were some of the challenges of growing it? And what's your pitch for everybody to have a mentor?
Yeah, I think the challenges of growing Edge was, it really wasn't like mentoring is not like a widget that you just crank out more of them, right? Every mentor is unique and dynamic and leads in a different way. We used to always say we need more A mentors, not to sound elitist, but a B or a C mentor, somebody that wasn't a good question asker or was inconsistent in showing up for calls. Like that the group went as the mentor went, right? And so finding our constraint was finding more A mentors. If we had A mentors, like we knew that the mentees would come, right? If we did our job well. What's my pitch for having a mentor? I mean, gosh, I think if you think you have it all figured out at 25, that's a dangerous spot to be in, right? And I mean, I'm recently 40, and I still have a lot to learn, but I've probably dealt with some hard stuff. I've dealt with, we're all fathers in this room and have been married, and so there's challenges that come with that, as well as the professional side. And so I think having somebody that is not just 20, 30 years older than you, but maybe 3 to 5 is, I mean, what's the scripture in Proverbs of like, in an abundance of counselors, there's wisdom, and with that, it's just like, it feels obvious, but I get that maybe some people don't prioritize that. So I mentoring's in my DNA, whether I was formerly leading edge or I'm not anymore. Like, it's still something that I put a premium on, and I'm probably getting asked to, mentor others more or spend time. Like, I've got a early coffee tomorrow morning with an Orr fellow. He sought me out after I spoke to them a couple months ago, and 23, 24-year-old young guy, and I don't know what he wants to talk about, but I'm more than willing to make time for that because people did that for me,
Does it surprise you how infrequently somebody who's younger asks someone in their space for coffee? Like, they don't take that chance?
Yeah. How infrequent that is?
I'm always surprised at how I wish I had gone back in time and asked more people to lunch, and they would have said yes.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when it's sort of how you operate, I don't know if you feel this way, Don, like, I'm a little bit like, you mean not everyone thinks this way, or operates this way, but you're right. Like, if people sometimes looked at my calendar, they'd probably think I'm crazy if I have like 5 lunches in a week. Now, it all kind of blurs together for me because it's Boilermaker Alliance related, it's community related. It's, I've been fortunate to have roles where it's part of how I operate. When people tell me, gosh, I need to start looking for a new job, I need to carve out some hours to start networking, I'm like, that's a head scratcher for me because I don't think about it that way, right? It's part of my week already. It's baked into how I move and operate. And so, I think I don't want to paint with broad strokes on Gen Z, but I've met some really sharp Gen Zers that are being intentional and reaching out and asking to meet. But it was probably the same way with millennials. I don't know if many kind of had that itch either, but I think it's absolutely critical throughout your whole career, but especially early on.
So for those in the audience who are shy, what's a well-crafted email look like that you might receive that will help them get that?
The shorter the better. I don't like paragraphs in emails. So I've learned over time, a well-crafted email. I mean, personalize it. Don't say, "Can I pick your brain?" That's kind of a cliche, but hey, I've heard your name, or heard you speak, or saw you on this, and we have this common friend. I know you're busy, but would love to, get 30 minutes of your time, and 30 minutes might become an hour or something like that. So, and sometimes it's just following up. I mean, I try to respond to everything, but sometimes I let something go through I actually have a folder in my email. It's called Act Soon. And so if I get an email request for like a lunch, like an hour, I just drag it over there, and then I try to like deal with that in bunches at a time, because it can kind of, sometimes there's weeks I don't get anything, and there's days where I get 4 requests. You know what I mean? So just trying to be really efficient with how I schedule those. And I've gotten into a pretty good rhythm of how I handle that.
What are you guys looking forward to this year, which will bring you together, like Rally? Tell us a little about things that are going to connect you in really fun ways that are meaningful to you and for the rest of us.
That's a good question. I mean, I like the consistency comment. I think it's a lot more of the same. We have really good rhythms as friends. And there's things that we've talked about. Something we've hosted. Myself and a few others have been faithful in hosting just a guys' night every few weeks. And I've talked to Dave about, I was like, how can we be more intentional with that space? As opposed to just being a hangout. Like, could we, how do we be more intentional when they do come together? Like, how do we use the time? So I'm looking forward to that. And, honestly, 2025, I just have a lot of hope and anticipation for the year. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for you yet, but I feel like in my spirit, I feel something building.
Yeah, Hux is trying to rope me into a half marathon in April, but I don't know if that's I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, we talked about taking our boys to like a Forrest Frank concert, kind of a newer singer, and
Just trying to find things like that to do. I don't know if there's one big thing. Rally is Elevate Ventures annual conference, which is in September this year. I'll be involved with that. It's kind of part of this new host committee, but I don't know. Hopefully another Final Four in San Antonio, right?
There we go.
That's what we're banking on.
Lock it down.
In terms of as you look at 2025, how do each of you plan annual goals or bucket lists, and do you use an app or anything productivity wise that might be helpful to us and people listening?
I don't necessarily like to overemphasize to do it just at year end. I think it's a good reminder if I don't have that rhythm of, where am I headed? Where are my goals? What am I being intentional about? What's God got on my heart? It's a good opportunity to reignite that rhythm, but I would advise not to overemphasize the end of the year and beginning of the year to do that. We've got that opportunity throughout the year. But I love the framework of look back, look up, look forward. Like, you can't change the past. What are we supposed to extract from a learning perspective? Harvest those lessons. Don't dwell in shame, right? Like, there might be some convictions there, but I'm really, if I'm ever leaning in conversation, like, I'm also passionate about that. Like, don't sit in shame, sit in conviction, right? And go differently forward. But I think that's part of that look up, like, what's God telling you about the past? And then how can you use that harvested lesson moving into the future so you don't experience more of the same and you experience more of what you want? And I just really, really simplify that. I tell my son, consequence is not bad. Consequence happens as a result of our choices. Let's learn the lesson and create more of the consequence that we like. So to really make it simple.
Yeah, I would say that's really good stuff. I have a year-end discipline that I've done for 12 or 13 years now where I write a 2-page, I type up a 2-page and I no more than 2 pages. So it's small font, but just everything that happened in that year, I always pull up my calendar, usually that last week in between Christmas and New Year's, try to carve out some time and do this. So I have it in the Dropbox saved going back to 2012. So every year I try to read the past five years reviews. It's kind of cool to see what I was consumed with that year, or what was, and then I type up like this. I just did it a few weeks ago, the 2024 year in review. And then, I used to do yearly goals. A few years ago, I switched to, I just focus on 12 weeks at a time. So I do quarterly. So as part of that exercise, after I did the look back, I thought about January 1st to March 31st, and I have 5 categories. I have spiritual, so my faith, and I picked up a kind of a spiritual mentor last year, an older gentleman that I'm spending intentional time with, and other things like reading my Bible and prayer and discipleship. But like, I always have a few things that I want to focus on that quarter, and hopefully like a must do. The other categories would be, I have 5, my family, so marriage and kids. So I always have a few things plus a must do. I have a kind of a health and wellness. So this is like my physical health and personal development. I want to read a couple books that quarter or whatever. 4th would be social, so relationships and finances. So this is where I'd have like, we want to knock out this home project, or want to have 3 couples over for dinner, that sort of thing. And then 5th would be community and business. So my goals in my day job, or this organization that I want to volunteer with, that sort of thing. And so those are kind of my 5 buckets. And then I generally at the bottom list like some big picture stuff for the year of, hey, I'd like to do an overnight trip with one of my kids to a new city, or a getaway with my wife, or join a paid board of a company. These are like some are stretchy, some are more like doable. And so that's my framework. I've tinkered with a lot of them. I haven't deviated from that. I just kind of print that one sheeter out, keep it in my moleskin, and refer to it pretty frequently. So
you mentioned books. What book or podcast or speaker, any kind of resource like that you'd like to share with the gang here that's impacted you or that you're looking forward to diving in more with?
And I would share two specific books. I try and get my books from trusted community and word of mouth, right? Like, there's this guy I know that writes this massive summary that's a book in and of itself, and it's like a VIP list going. No, like I love like talking to folks like you that, Greg, like that, you're just a voracious reader, and you know, just through conversation, you should read this book, right? Like, and to give an example, one of the books I'll share, it's called The Bait of Satan. My cousin shared it with me, and then yesterday, Aaron Brockett gave a message on offense. And it's just a really good book about like being offended, or the act of an offense is unavoidable. Like, it's promised in Scripture, it's going to happen to you all the time, but staying offended is a choice. And that book was such a blessing to like reframe. It's not a linear thing. Like, I'm offended and now I have this enemy. It's like, just like Scripture, it's so countercultural, like what you're really doing to yourself in offense. And so it's a really good one. I think like in little moments, how to shed offense. And then what's the one about electronics?
Anxious Generation.
Anxious Generation.
Jonathan Haidt.
Screen time. Like he was saying, our boys played together this weekend, and he said he shared that Link was bragging about how they weren't using screens. And I'm not saying that. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm guilty.
8 hours venturing around the village of West Clay.
So I'm not sitting here bragging saying my son has no screen time, but it does give a compelling case for how to really foster screenless play.
Yeah, a book I was gifted over Christmas that I'm 3/4 of the way through is Healing What's Within by Chuck DeGroat, and it's all about your interior landscape, which again is something that I feel like I've grown in and I'm continually working at in terms of not neglecting what's going on inside, sort of the heart. And then a podcast, it's sort of a fun one. Of course, anything that IBJ puts out, right, Spangle. But I do like Nate's, Nate does some, Indiana 250. But no, one that I listen to pretty regularly is the All In podcast with, those David Sachs, Chamath Palihapitiya, David Freeberg, and Jason Calcanis. It's insightful and entertaining. So.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time. Do we want to give everybody the last word, or, Dave, Chris, if there's any wisdom that you'd like to impart on the end of the podcast here, anything that you want to promote, please, this is your opportunity.
No, I don't have anything to hawk other than just love this guy, and I'm grateful that I really do think that we're going to be friends through eternity, and he's somebody I know I can count on and has got my back, and doesn't just say that, he shows it with his actions, which is pretty powerful, and I learn a lot being around him, and thankful to count him in my inner circle, and it's a cherished friendship. So love you, brother.
Love you too, man. That's a +1 on that. And the only tidbit I would share here at the end is it was actually shared during a generosity campaign at our church, and even sharing that can maybe dilute what I'm going to say, but we went through a very fruitful season, and just the presence of God was so in it. And one of the things that was shared was to consider the fact that like where we are today and the things that we're able to do within the church is we're on the shoulders of the generosity of others, and specifically with monetarily, but not just monetarily, like sacrifice of time, talent, and treasure, right? And I want to say like just sharing from a place of like, I know that the messiest parts of my story are the most additive, and anyone that listens to this, like those things that you maybe feel like you can't share, I think you'd be surprised how God would use it. And just knowing that, like, I just want to say for myself, like, I think there's a posture of a lot of people that, I fully recognize by the gift of grace that, like, I'm here because of the generosity of others, time and talent specifically, right? And just by the grace of God. So just lean into those truths, like your mess matters, and a lot of people want to lean into it.
Well, what a great way to close. Well, I just want to say, Don and I love you guys. Hux, you and me are going to be Cabros for life. More on that later. Dave, you've always blessed me by saying I'm your chief of staff, and I'm just telling you, I'm just your staff. You just calling me, bro. We love you. Thank you for your friendship, for glorifying God and blessing our city in what we get to experience with you. So it's been great
Thanks
to be
for
with
making
you.
the time.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
And thank you for joining us here on Citizen 7. You can find out more about Citizen 7 at their website, citizen7indy.com. And do we want to promote the job opportunity? I'm going to edit it out if you don't want to, but
Sure.
Don, you all are hiring over at Citizen 7. It's a great opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
We did a strategic plan and had 2 half-day sessions on how we take EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, for Citizen 7. So how can we be more focused? How can we be more intentional about prioritized outcomes? So we're hiring a person for 20 hours a week and is a network catalyst. It's posted on Greg and mine, and I don't know whether it's on the website or not. But if you want to find out about it, contact us. And it's a 20-hour flexible position. And it'd be a lot of fun, and I think we're in a real season of momentum and growth, and this person will really help us multiply our efforts.
You can find out more about that in the news section of the website, and we'll put a link in the show notes. So thanks again for joining us this month. We'll see you again next month.